Hello, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is Dr.Bhawani Adhikari. He has come with a play. The title of the play is Trifles, written by Susan Glaspell. Trifles is a one-act play written by Susan Glaspell. The play revolves around a murder investigation providing a perspective about the status of women in contemporary American society, reflecting the male mentality as a dominant gender. Mrs. Wright is arrested as on suspicion of murdering her husband, but she never appears on the stage. The audience learns about her from the perspective of her neighbors and their reactions to items they find inside the Wright's home. There are five actors in the play, and they are George Henderson is a county attorney. This is Henry Peters, officer, and then husband of Mrs. Peters, Lewis Halley, neighboring farmer of the Wrights, Mrs. Peters, wife of officer, and Mrs. Halley, the wife of Lewis Halley and neighbor of the Wrights. These are the five characters in the play. Mrs. Wright was brought up in the town. She was fashionable and she had a happy life in her youth. She got married to Mr. Wright, who was a gentleman, honest, hardworking, and disciplined person, but he was strict and commanding one to keep Mrs. Wright at home. He did not allow her to go out of the house and had a social life with the villagers. She had lost her one child too, and she did not have anyone to talk at home. She could not tolerate strict order and rules of the house. She was tired of her husband, and she was furious one. So she purchased a bird canary as her friend to listen to the song of the bird. But he did not like the bird as the friend of Mrs. Wright, so he killed the bird canary and put it in a cage. Then she was waiting for the opportunity to kill him, and she tied his throat while he was in a deep sleep. She pretended that he committed suicide by hanging himself, but it was her act of murdering him. Holly and Harry were farmers and they were going, where is Miss there? Right place where? They were going to sell the potatoes. Not they were going. There must be WERE, that is missed. Were going to sell the potatoes in the market through the house of Mr. Wright. They wanted to meet him, but he did not receive the call and went to his house. They went to his house. They found Mrs. Wright sitting on a chair, and she had not informed the police about the murder, about the death. She was found normal. She was not nervous, and it seemed that she wanted to hide the truth. When the county attorney and the officer or sheriff came in the house for investigation, the female members, Mrs. Hawley and Mrs. Peters, wanted to hide the dead canary found in the case. They kept it in their secret from the male members, and they did not want Mrs. Wright to be sentenced as a criminal. The male investigators did not give much importance to the triples, but the female got conscious to hide the fact found in the triples things. They investigated the kitchen and all around the house. Even though women were hiding the triples to keep the secret, it was found out that Mrs. Wright was the culprit and to be sentenced. The play shows that women always support women, no matter whether they know or not, but men do not do so, as Mrs. Holly and Mrs. Peters have done in the play to hide facts of improving Mrs. Wright as a criminal. It has displayed that women must have their rights, and if it is controlled, and if they are confined, like Mrs. Wright by Mr. Wright, then they do not mind taking the life of their own husbands, as Mrs. Wright has done in the play. It has advised dealing with women with equal rights, dignity, and honor, and gender discrimination must be uprooted in society. Truth always lies in triples, but male members do not give importance as women do. In fact, this drama reflects the real situation of America in the past. How in American society, male members were dominant, women were suppressed, oppressed, controlled, no rights at all. They were confined in the house. They did not have any chance to go outside and have a socialization with the people. Is Mrs. Wright was there, right? And then Mrs. Wright was in a condition, a happy condition, brought up in the town. She was singer, she was an artist, she was very happy in her life. But later, when she got married and went in the village, and it was a kind of problem. Getting married in the village from the town was one problem, and later she had one child, but that also passed away, and she was alone at home. Though Mr. Wright was very good, kind, loving, helpful, disciplined, but he was disciplined, commanding, and he had order and everything he had to maintain in the house. He wanted to keep Mrs. Wright within the command and control at home. He did not allow her to go outside the house, and she had to be within the four walls. And even the neighbors, villagers did not come in her house. Perhaps Mr. Wright did not like it and did not want them to come. They were perhaps afraid. And Mrs. Wright had purchased one canary as her friend to sing the song in the house, but that was also killed by Mr. Wright. And she was waiting or getting a chance to kill him. And one night, he was sleeping in a deep sleep, and she tied the rope in his throat, and she killed him. And she told that he killed himself by hanging. And Mr. Holly and Harry were going to sell their potatoes as farmers to the town from the house of Mr. Wright. They had called previous day to him, and they had a talk. But next day, when they were going, he did not receive the call. So they went in their house. In his house, at that time, Mrs. Wright was alone. She was sitting on a chair. She was moving on a chair. She was not nervous. She had not informed about it to the police. And she was really the criminal. And now she did not allow them to go off too. She told them that he committed suicide. And next day, when the investigation started with county officer, attorney, and then with these females and neighbors, and she was already arrested. And these two, Mrs. Holly, Mrs. Peters, and Mrs. Holly wanted to hide the fact. They did not want to open the fact to the male members. They were sympathetic to Mrs. Wright. They did not want Mrs. Wright to be punished as a criminal, and they also felt this. Mrs. Peter also felt the same condition as Mrs. Wright was feeling. She was now threatening about against her husband, perhaps in the just investigation. And the kitchen was not properly managed, and everything was rough, and it was not well managed. And through this, they found out, though they kept that cage of canary bird, dead bird that was killed, twisted with the neck, and blood was there. And it was known that the fact was that because of killing of the bird canary by Mr. Wright, Mrs. Wright had taken his life, and these women members kept it within their secret, and other male members did not care about it. Though at last it was proved that Mrs. Wright was the criminal, and she was to be punished. It shows that women should be respected. They should not be kept as objects. This should not be discrimination between men and women. They should have their right. They must enjoy their freedom, liberty. They are not the dolls. They are not the object of entertainment for the male. And then Mr. Wright was wrong to behave Mrs. Wright in that way. So he got the result of his life-taking event by his own wife. No matter she got the punishment, but his life had gone because his life was much more important than the punishment that she got. So it awakens all the male members to be conscious, to be aware, to be quite a lot about the rights of the women, and not to behave in the manner is Mr. Right behaved to his wife, because life is equal. There is no disparity. There is no difference. There is no matter who is superior and inferior. It is only the social made construction. Society makes superior and inferior. This is the wrong concept. This is the wrong conception of making superior and inferior. No one is superior and no one is inferior. Everyone is equal, either male or female. That is what should be in the society for harmonious living, loving, kind, better, cooperative society. There should be equality, equal respect, equal honor, equal dignity, equal rights, and then only the life and moves and the society moves very perfectly. Otherwise it becomes a problem. No matter, not one, it is not only in America, it is the case of throughout the world, everywhere, in any corner of the earth. That sort of provision, rights, and equality must be managed. This is the idea of the play. I think it would be good enough to understand, and you can listen my